What if I told you the reason you feel stuck, overlooked, or powerless is not because you lack talent, but because you're holding onto things you were never supposed to keep? Things no one warns you about. Things that quietly destroy your influence, your respect, your future. And the most dangerous part, the moment you start removing them, your entire life begins to change. But not everyone will like who you become. So tonight, we're not talking about success. We're talking about power. Most people think power comes from big moments, a speech that inspires a crowd, a bold move that turns everything around, a public declaration that finally shows the world who you are. But that's not where real power begins. It begins in places no one sees, in the quiet decisions you make when no one is watching, in the moments where you feel the urge to react, to prove something, to defend yourself, and you choose not to. Aamir didn't realize this at first. He thought if he worked harder, spoke better, and showed people his value, things would eventually fall into place. That's what he had always believed, that effort, honesty, and openness would naturally lead to respect. But what he didn't understand was that without discipline, those qualities could be used against him. Every time he reacted emotionally, he revealed something. Every time he spoke too much, he gave away leverage. Every time he tried to be understood, he unknowingly gave others control over how he felt. The shift didn't happen overnight. It started with a single moment. Someone criticized him unfairly in a meeting. Normally, he would have defended himself immediately, explained everything, tried to clear his name. But this time he paused. He felt the same rush of emotion, his heart beating faster, his mind racing with arguments, but he didn't act on it. He stayed quiet, he observed, and something strange happened. The situation passed without escalating. The tension dissolved. And for the first time, he saw clearly that reacting would have made things worse, not better. That moment stayed with him. It bothered him, but it also awakened something. He began to notice how often people exposed their weaknesses without realizing it. The colleague who couldn't handle criticism, the friend who needed constant validation, the manager who lost control under pressure. It wasn't their lack of skill that made them weak, it was their lack of control over themselves. Aamir started experimenting, not with others but with himself. When he felt the urge to interrupt, he listened instead. When he wanted to argue, he asked a question. When he felt disrespected, he stayed composed. At first, it felt unnatural, almost like he was suppressing who he really was. But slowly, he realized he wasn't losing himself. He was refining himself. Discipline, he discovered, is not about restriction. It's about direction. It's about choosing your response instead of being controlled by your impulses. Most people don't realize how much of their life is driven by automatic reactions. Someone says something offensive and they react instantly. Something doesn't go their way and they complain. They feel insecure and they seek reassurance. These patterns feel natural, but they quietly drain power from a person. The more Aamir practiced restraint, the more he noticed a shift in how others treated him. Conversations changed. People interrupted him less. They listened more carefully when he spoke. There was a weight to his presence that hadn't been there before, not because he became louder or more dominant, but because he became more controlled. He also began to understand something deeper. Silence is not weakness. In fact, it can be one of the strongest responses. When you don't react, you force the other person to sit with their own words. When you don't reveal your emotions immediately, you create space to think clearly. And in that space, you gain an advantage that most people don't even realize exists. There were still moments where it was difficult, times when he felt misunderstood, times when staying quiet felt like losing. But he started asking himself a different question. Not how do I win this moment, but what response gives me strength in the long run? That question changed everything. Because winning an argument might feel good temporarily, but maintaining control builds something far more valuable. He began applying this discipline beyond conversations, in his habits, in his routines, waking up when he didn't feel like it, finishing tasks without seeking praise, keeping promises to himself even when no one else knew. These small acts didn't seem significant at first, but over time they built a foundation, a quiet confidence that didn't depend on others. What made this transformation powerful was that it was invisible. There were no announcements, no dramatic changes that others could point to, but internally everything was different. He wasn't easily shaken anymore. He didn't need constant reassurance. He didn't feel the same urgency to prove himself, and because of that his decisions became sharper, more intentional. Most people chase motivation because it feels good. It gives them a temporary boost, a sense of direction. But motivation is unstable. It comes and goes. Discipline is different. It doesn't rely on how you feel. It stays even when you're tired, frustrated, or discouraged. And that consistency is what creates real power. Aamir realized that the world often rewards those who appear confident, but true confidence comes from something deeper. It comes from knowing that you can rely on yourself, that you won't break under pressure, that you won't lose control when things don't go your way. And that kind of confidence can't be faked. It's built through repeated acts of discipline. He also became more selective with his energy. Before, he would engage in every conversation, respond to every message, involve himself in every situation. Now he paused. He asked himself whether something deserved his attention, and more often than not the answer was no. This wasn't arrogance. It was clarity. He understood that attention is a form of power, and where you place it shapes your life. Over time, people started describing him differently. Calm, focused, hard to read. Some found it intimidating, others found it admirable, but very few truly understood what had changed. They saw the result, not the process. They didn't see the countless moments where he chose discipline over impulse, where he stayed silent instead of reacting, where he controlled himself instead of trying to control others. And that's the part most people miss. Power doesn't come from controlling the world around you. It comes from controlling the world within you, your thoughts, your reactions, your habits. When those are in order, everything else begins to align. There is a kind of strength in knowing you don't have to respond to everything, that you don't have to prove your worth in every situation, that you can walk away, stay silent, or simply observe without feeling weak. In reality, that is where strength is tested the most, not in action but in restraint. Aamir no longer felt the need to be seen as powerful, and that, ironically, made him more powerful than before, because he wasn't chasing an image. He was building something real, something stable, something that didn't depend on anyone else's opinion. And once you reach that point, where your actions are guided by discipline rather than emotion, where your silence carries more weight than your words, where your consistency replaces your need for motivation, you begin to realize that power was never something you had to chase. It was something you had to build quietly, patiently, and without needing anyone to notice. Aamir used to believe that being open was a strength. He thought that if he shared his thoughts, his plans, his struggles, people would understand him better, that they would support him, guide him, maybe even protect him. It felt natural to talk about what he was working on, what he hoped to achieve, and what he feared losing. After all, that's what trust looked like to him. But over time, he began to notice something unsettling. Not everyone responded the same way. Some listened with genuine interest. Others nodded, smiled, and encouraged him. But there were a few who became quieter, more observant, almost as if they were collecting pieces of information, not to support him, but to understand how he worked, where he was vulnerable, and how they could use it if needed. At first, he dismissed the thought. It felt too negative, too suspicious. He didn't want to believe that people around him could think that way. But reality has a way of repeating itself until you can no longer ignore it. Another idea of his was taken and presented by someone else. Another personal detail he shared was later used against him in a subtle argument. Another plan he talked about never materialized, but somehow, someone else seemed to move ahead in the exact same direction. That's when it started to shift. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. He didn't confront anyone. He didn't accuse or withdraw completely. He simply began to observe more carefully. Who asks questions? Who listens closely? Who celebrates your progress and who becomes distant when you succeed? He realized something uncomfortable. Not everyone who smiles at you wants the best for you. Some people are curious, not supportive. Some are competitive, even if they pretend not to be. And some are simply waiting for an opportunity not to help, but to advance themselves. This didn't mean everyone was bad. That wasn't the lesson. The lesson was that access should not be automatic. Just because someone is around you doesn't mean they deserve to know everything about you. Just because someone is friendly doesn't mean they've earned your trust. Aamir started small. The next time someone asked about his plans, he gave a vague answer. Not a lie, but not the full truth either. Just working on a few things, he said casually. The conversation moved on. Nothing dramatic happened. But internally it felt different. For the first time he kept something for himself. It felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, like he was hiding. But as days passed he noticed something important. The less he shared, the more focused he became. There were no outside opinions shaping his decisions. No subtle doubts planted by others. No pressure to prove that he was making progress. It was just him and the work. He also noticed how people reacted differently. Some lost interest quickly when he stopped sharing details. Their curiosity faded. Others respected his boundaries without questioning them. And a few tried harder to get information, asking more specific questions, pushing gently as if they were trying to unlock something. That's when Aamir truly understood. Access is a form of power. The more people know about you, your goals, your fears, your next move, the more they can influence, predict, or even interfere with your path. Not always intentionally, but sometimes without even realizing it. He began to think back on his past. How many times had he talked about something before it was ready? How often had excitement led him to share too much, too soon? And how many of those plans had quietly faded away after being exposed to too many opinions, too much noise, too many eyes? There's something fragile about new ideas. They need space to grow, silence to develop, protection from doubt, both your own and others. When you share them too early, they become vulnerable. People question them, reshape them, sometimes even discourage them without meaning to. And slowly, what once felt clear becomes uncertain. Aamir stopped doing that. He began building in silence, working without announcing, planning without discussing. It wasn't about secrecy in a negative sense. It was about protection, protecting his focus, protecting his direction, protecting his energy. He also became more careful with trust. Before, trust was his default. Now it was something people earned over time, not through words but through consistency, through actions, through how they responded in different situations. Did they respect boundaries? Did they support without needing details? Did they stay the same when things changed? Trust, he realized, is not about how close someone feels. It's about how reliable they are. And reliability takes time to reveal itself. There were moments when he questioned this new approach, times when he felt distant from others, when conversations felt more surface level than before. But he began to understand that not every relationship needs depth. Not everyone needs full access to your inner world. Some connections are meant to stay light, and that's okay. At the same time, the few people he did trust became even more valuable. Because that trust was no longer given freely, it was chosen carefully. It was built on understanding, not assumption. And that made those relationships stronger, not weaker. One evening, someone he had known for years asked him directly, "Why don't you share things like you used to?" Aamir paused for a moment, then replied calmly, "Because I realized not everything needs to be said out loud." The person laughed it off, but Aamir meant every word. He had learned that silence is not emptiness. It's control. It's awareness. It's knowing that your life doesn't need to be explained to everyone around you. He also noticed something else. The less he talked about his plans, the more people paid attention when he actually did something. His actions started to carry more weight. There was a sense of unpredictability, a quiet confidence that didn't rely on constant updates or validation. And that changed how he was perceived, not because he tried to create an image, but because he stopped overexposing himself. He became more intentional, more measured, more focused. There's a difference between being open and being exposed. Openness is a choice, made with the right people at the right time. Exposure is when everything is visible, whether it should be or not. And in a world where information spreads quickly, exposure can cost more than people realize. Aamir didn't become closed off. He didn't isolate himself or distrust everyone. He simply understood that access has levels, that not everyone belongs in every part of your life, and that protecting your space is not selfish, it's necessary. He no longer felt the need to explain his decisions, or justify his direction, or share every step of his journey, because he understood something that most people overlook. The more you talk about what you're going to do, the less energy you have to actually do it. And once you experience the clarity that comes from keeping certain things to yourself, from moving without noise, from building without interruption, you begin to see how powerful that restraint really is, how it sharpens your focus, how it protects your vision, and how it allows you to move forward without distraction, without pressure, and without giving the wrong people a front row seat to something that was never meant for them in the first place. At one point, Aamir believed that understanding power meant becoming harder, colder, and less emotional. After everything he had experienced, the betrayal, the setbacks, the realization that the world doesn't always reward sincerity, he started to think that maybe the only way to survive was to stop caring altogether, to become someone who calculated every move, who trusted no one, who did whatever it took to stay ahead. For a brief moment, that idea felt convincing. It even felt safe. If you expect nothing from people, you can't be disappointed. If you keep your emotions locked away, no one can use them against you. If you focus only on winning, you reduce life to something simple, results. But something about it didn't sit right with him. It felt incomplete, because while that mindset might protect you from being hurt, it also slowly disconnects you from something essential. It turns every interaction into a transaction, every relationship into a calculation, and over time it leaves you with power but no peace. Aamir began to notice this conflict within himself. On one hand, he was becoming more disciplined, more aware, more in control. On the other hand, there were moments where he felt distant, almost detached from the values that once defined him. The kindness he used to show came more cautiously now. The empathy he once gave freely was filtered. And while this made him more guarded, it also made him question whether he was losing something important. The real shift happened during a simple interaction. A junior colleague approached him one day, clearly nervous, asking for help with something Aamir had already mastered. In the past, he would have helped without hesitation. But this time, he paused. A thought crossed his mind. What if this person uses what I teach them to compete with me later? It was a practical thought, a realistic one, but as quickly as it came, something else followed. A quieter voice asking a different question. Is protecting your position more important than doing what's right? That moment forced him to confront something deeper. He realized that understanding how the world works doesn't mean you have to become like the worst parts of it. Just because people act out of self-interest doesn't mean you have to abandon your principles. Awareness gives you options. It doesn't remove your responsibility. So he helped. Not because it guaranteed anything in return, not because it would benefit him directly, but because it aligned with who he wanted to be. And strangely, that decision didn't make him feel weaker. It made him feel more grounded, more certain. That's when Aamir understood something that changed everything. Power without morality is unstable. It might give you short-term gains, but it creates long-term consequences. It isolates you. It makes people cautious around you. It forces you to constantly maintain control, because if you lose it even for a moment, everything you've built can turn against you. But morality without awareness has its own risks. If you move through life blindly trusting everyone, ignoring how people actually behave, you leave yourself exposed. You become easy to manipulate, easy to overlook, easy to replace. Good intentions alone are not enough to protect you. The balance lies in combining both. To see clearly but act wisely. To understand human nature but not be controlled by it. To know when to be firm and when to be compassionate. Aamir started applying this balance in different situations. When someone tried to take advantage of him, he didn't react emotionally, but he also didn't ignore it. He addressed it calmly, directly, without aggression. When someone made a mistake, he didn't immediately judge or dismiss them. He considered the context, the intention, and responded fairly. He became more measured, not extreme in either direction. He didn't swing between being overly trusting and overly suspicious. Instead, he observed, assessed, and then chose his response based on both logic and principle. This approach wasn't always easy. There were moments where being fair felt like a disadvantage, times when he saw others succeed through shortcuts, through manipulation, through strategies that ignored ethics completely. And for a moment, it tempted him. The thought appeared again, maybe this is what it takes. But each time he reminded himself of something simple. The goal is not just to reach a position of power. The goal is to be able to live with how you got there. Because eventually, every action has a consequence, not always immediately, but over time. In your reputation, in your relationships, in your own sense of self. Aamir also began to understand that morality is not weakness. It's restraint with intention. It's having the ability to act unfairly and choosing not to. It's having the power to dominate and choosing justice instead. That kind of control requires more strength than simply doing whatever benefits you in the moment. He noticed that people responded differently to this balance. They respected his boundaries, but they also trusted his decisions. They knew he wouldn't be easily manipulated, but they also knew he wouldn't act unjustly. And that combination created something rare, a form of influence that didn't rely on fear or approval, but on consistency. There was a quiet confidence in knowing that he didn't have to compromise his values to maintain his position, that he could navigate complex situations without losing his sense of right and wrong, that he could be strategic without being dishonest, firm without being harsh, and cautious without being closed off. Over time, this balance became part of how he operated. It wasn't something he had to think about constantly. It became instinctive. When faced with a decision, he didn't just ask what would give him the most advantage. He asked what was fair, what was sustainable, what aligned with the kind of person he wanted to remain. And that last part mattered more than he expected, because identity shapes behavior. If you see yourself as someone who will do anything to win, you start justifying actions that you once would have questioned. But if you see yourself as someone who values both strength and integrity, your choices begin to reflect that automatically. Aamir realized that the real challenge is not learning how to gain power. There are many ways to do that. The real challenge is keeping your character intact while you do it, because power tests you. It gives you opportunities to act without consequence, to take shortcuts, to prioritize yourself at the expense of others. And in those moments, who you are becomes clear. He no longer saw the world in extremes, not as a place where you either dominate or get dominated, but as a space where awareness and morality can coexist, where you can protect yourself without becoming hardened, where you can succeed without compromising everything that matters. That understanding gave him something deeper than control. It gave him stability, a sense that no matter how situations changed, he had a framework to navigate them, not based purely on emotion and not purely on calculation, but on a balance that allowed him to remain both effective and grounded. And once you begin to operate from that place, where your strength is guided by principle, where your decisions reflect both clarity and conscience, where you no longer feel the need to choose between being powerful or being good, You start to realize that the real advantage was never just in understanding others, but in mastering yourself in a way that doesn't cost you who you are in the process. This video is for educational and self-development purposes only. The ideas inspired by historical thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli are meant to help you understand human behavior, awareness, and personal growth, not to promote manipulation, dishonesty, or harming others. For Muslim viewers, these lessons should always be understood within the boundaries of Islamic ethics, justice, sincerity, patience, and accountability before Allah. For all viewers, regardless of background, use knowledge responsibly. Because true success is not just becoming powerful, it's becoming powerful without losing your integrity.